For several years now, Americans have been sharing their personal stories of having an abortion. Some stories have been told as part of a national campaign to help destigmatize this very common and very safe healthcare procedure. And others have come from a very personal place, like Kimon Felix's poem about her own abortion in her book, Build Yourself a Boat. And Kimon joins us now. She's a writer and political strategist. Also with us, Mita Mukhopadhyay, former executive editor of Teen Vogue. And Kimon, you've recently said that I want to decenter femaleness as the identifier for abortion need in this conversation we're having right now about abortion rights in America. What do you mean by that?
It's important for everyone to remember that people who need abortions aren't just women. There are people, men who have wombs, transgendered people, people who are intersex. Reproductive justice is not just a woman's issue, it's a people's issue. And when we frame reproductive justice and frame abortion rights as something that is uniquely women's fight, we exclude a lot of the people who are most impacted in this conversation and who are most at risk in a post-Roe world, including trans men and intersex people.
It's so important what Kimon is saying, Samita, and I feel like your piece about the demise of feminist websites and feminism really being a part of the mainstream conversation with the recent closure of Bitch Magazine, it feels like this is a moment when we need all of that content more than ever. And as a former editor of the now closed Feministing, which I wrote for, and there are tons of articles, you can go back through the archives, about abortion, going back like 15 years here. I mean, what are we missing, in your view, without these feminist outlets at a time when we're losing rights?
You know, as I argue in the piece, I think the websites themselves are almost a metaphor for women's rights, right? And really the reason we need them is often the reason that we lose them. They're very hard to sustain. Independent media in general is hard to fund. But I think the service they provide was historically invaluable, right? Really sitting at the kind of intersection, I think, of activism, feminism, and journalism. And of course, you know, journalistic outlets are taking this story seriously. It's the biggest story in the country and has been for a week and a half. And that's great. But a lot of that is because of the work of feminist blogs and feminist websites that kind of prioritize this issue. And at a certain point, they couldn't ignore us anymore. And so they started to have to kind of do the reporting at some of these bigger publications. But I still think there needs to be a space for people to share and explore, share personal stories, be angry and be righteous, and to learn about these issues in a dedicated and concentrated way that a journalistic institution is not going to do, because that's not what they're necessarily supposed to do either.
Important. And Kimon, in the realm of telling stories about our own experiences, tell us why you decided to share your own abortion story. I mean, you wrote a poem about it in your book. Lay out why you think we need to hear more stories. Not everybody is required to tell their story, but if you're comfortable doing so, why is that important?
You know, I wrote that poem about 3 years ago because it felt important to me to try to make the connection between the sort of social implications and decisions that a person is forced to consider as they're moving through the world. And so me as a political strategist and also as a writer, as a poet primarily, I was thinking a lot about what it meant to enter the world or to bring a child into the world during a Trump presidency. This was during the election. I was voting for Hillary Clinton, volunteering for the Hillary Clinton campaign, and really trying to evaluate, especially at the loss of that campaign and with the win of Trump, how my own body was responding and reacting to that news. And I framed it around abortion because it felt like the most visceral way to explain sacrifice and to try to articulate the kinds of sacrifice that women at large and people who are not men are forced to endure under a harmful presidency, under a dictator fascist leadership. I think it's super important that we talk about abortion as a thing that everyone may need, as a thing that everyone has a relationship to. But I do think that people, women in particular, should not feel like the only way to humanize abortion and the only way to validate their right to abortion is to talk about their own abortions. As a creative, that's what I do, and that feels important to my artistic process. But it is always really painful going back to Kavanaugh, right, to see women in particular get on social media and try to explain the kind of harm that's happening to their bodies as they're being unfairly governed against. And I don't necessarily know that telling those stories is what actually changes the political reality of how our bodies are being governed. I think that it helps us create community. I think that it helps us find other people in the world and in our ecosystem who understand the kind of pain that we're in and understand how these structures create pain, physical and emotional pain. But I'm beyond the assumption that any articulation of pain, any compelling articulation of sacrifice will actually move any of these politicians further towards codifying Roe and protecting our right to abortion. And I think that it actually makes me quite sad that we live in a world where women think that the only way that they can convince people to validate their experiences is to constantly re-traumatize themselves, whether on social media or any other kinds of media. I don't actually think it does anything outside of bring us closer to each other, which is valuable and necessary, but it's not a necessarily political choice.
It's important. Samita, we only have one more minute, but Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary today, spoke to how the right to abortion is an economic decision for so many American families. I mean, speak to how lack of access to abortion and reproductive health care is an economic decision at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, especially when you look at student loans and you look at the job market and you look at rent prices, women's ability to decide when they want to go to college, when they're going to have a baby. I mean, these are life and death decisions. They are, the decision that keeps you from entering poverty or going into a cycle of poverty. And so it is beyond just a personal choice or a lifestyle choice or a decision. It is absolutely an economic decision. And that's for every woman. I think it's also important that we focus a lot on the most vulnerable women, and that is true, right? The most vulnerable women are the most vulnerable under a potential overturned Roe. But it's really going to impact most women. Most of us do not actually have the resources to just, have a child whenever we want to. We need to do life planning around it. And so I think that is absolutely part of the conversation, is this is not just about our bodily autonomy. Obviously, yes, it is, but it is also about our ability to make these financial choices, frankly, in a game that is rigged against us, and we are very, very, very hard to win.
Kymone Felix and Samita Mukhopadhyay, thank you so much. This is really smart conversation. I'm grateful for both of you. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.